Off to order. Sean, why don't you start us off?
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. Make sure everybody's got this. We've got a couple extra too, if like you need the, oh, you got one. Okay, great. Just to remind the council on the purpose of the workshops that we've had, is we're trying to develop what I describe as a holistic, longer-term financial plan for the city. And really the goal is to give you some models so that you can see, as we move forward, what's going to be the impact of some of the decisions, and the council can wrestle with what are the projects that we really feel need to get done, what's the timing of those projects, and what's going to be the impact on the ratepayers, taxpayers in the city. And really look at it again in that holistic, long-term fashion to hopefully come to a decision that's going to take all those aspects and impacts into account before you have to actually proceed with things. The last session that we had, I think it was technically a finance committee, but I think most of you were able to attend it. We had a preliminary list of capital improvement projects, and what was pointed out, as I recall from the group, is we really wanted to make sure that the public safety building got included in this mix, and so we do have that for today's discussion. And then Neil and Devin also kicked back that project list to the department heads. Mm-hmm. They've worked to update that again, so we've got that updated as well. I'll at this point then I'll start going through. I've tried to keep everything, instead of showing you what's behind the scenes, which is this kind of stuff, which makes everybody's head spin.
It makes Neil happy, though.
Yeah. Well,
No, I like this better.
Yeah. We've got most everything in charts to kind of lay out the impacts, because I think it's easier to kind of follow that and see what's really driving things. But if there's any questions on the numbers, certainly we can reference this material as well. All right. Okay, so if we can go to page 3, I want to start there. The Capital Projects Fund is going to be a biggie in driving the tax impact and the projects going forward for the city. And so where the project list is currently, the CIP, Capital Improvement Fund, going forward for the next 5 years is listed here in total. And then what we have, and is certainly available for the council to look at, is this is broken down by department as well. And you may even have seen some of these previously. So we've shown the totals here, and what you see also is, in the blue line, is the amount that we're expecting to need to finance or issue tax-exempt bonds for. And the difference between those two are projects that fall into one of two categories. One is, we've got, I think, one in particular project that we decided to assume some grant funding for to reduce what the city would either have to pay cash or finance, and that was on the Vine Street project. And then we've also included the assumption that any project that is under $150,000, it would be the goal of the city not to borrow for those if we can, and to use cash financing to the extent possible. This list, and we'll have another one, but this list also does not include the public works building, or I'm sorry, public safety building. So we're going to look in the next couple slides both ways, with and without, so you'll see the impact of both. Okay?
Good question.
Yes.
So in 2015, you're saying there's $3.5 million of projects under 150,000 plus the grant funds. All those things, they're totaling?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, and the largest difference there is the grant, but there are projects also that would be in that 150 or below range.
There must be a lot of them, because that grant is only...
1.8.
It was
That was
about
1.8,
$2 million.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, and then the total, one other thing I wanted to note on page 3, the total CIP, 5 years, is that's that 34 million. So that's the combination of projects expected to be bonded for, as well as projects that would be covered with the issuance of debt.
Neil and Devin, the projects under 150 have to fall within our levy?
One of two things, either it'll come out of our, and he'll show you them a bit.
Sure.
The existing capital money that, you
Yep.
know, the
We have a bond.
excess.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yes, it would somehow have to either be like we've always called the short-term borrowing or work.
Right,
You're asking
some
about
of
the
the,
debt
some of,
limit? Yes, that would apply.
Not debt limit, but the levy limits.
limit.
That's what I meant.
Yeah,
some of the projects included in here are, two police cars a year.
okay,
And that would count
included
against
in
the
here.
levy limit.
okay.
Right.
All right,
But if you recall, when we in our
Yep.
capital fund, we carried over about $1.1 million.
yep,
And even though the council has appropriated $730,000 of that, we also issued an intent to reimburse ourselves out of debt.
Okay.
So we're gonna have that $1.1 million to utilize for shorter-term capital, but I think as Sean will point out, obviously that runs out.
yep,
So
okay,
at
thank you.
that point, then it would just go on the levy somehow.
But that would really affect our operating, correct?
Sure.
Big time.
Or we could issue debt for it.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of those you could issue debt for,
Combine, yep.
but I think, for the bigger picture, I think, the focus was on larger projects. to
Thank
issue
you.
debt.
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
And Mayor, just to piggyback on that, one of the unintended consequences of the levy limits has been as projects, particularly of a lower amount, that normally you'd like to pay cash for, and they usually don't have a very long useful life either, which is another reason to pay cash for them. The levy limits have kind of crowded that out and made it more difficult to do those with cash, which has kind of been a negative, because then you're adding interest on paying those kind of things, where otherwise maybe you wouldn't have to do that. Okay. All right, if we flip over then to page 4, this slide on page 4 is really the same as the slide on page 3, except for one factor, and that is that on this chart for the capital project fund, we add the public safety building with an estimated budget of 13 million.
And that number is from the last study we had?
That was from the recommendation from the Public Safety Committee. They took, I believe, the information from the last study and updated those costs, applied a cost index to it. I'm not
That-
certain where the $2 million for land
That
came
seems
from.
huge to me for what we would,
All right, Hoggett.
Right.
Where in the heck did you come up with that? I'm kidding.
Well, Neil was there, and so were police and fire, and based on the original study, there were some other factors that we thought we would add for inflation, and I think Rich was there too.
Oh, so it's that side of the table.
Yeah, we essentially, the previous study, we kind of factored in a percentage, and there are some efficiencies that can be gained from that, but we didn't want to come up with a number we thought would be too low or not a realistic number. So I think this was a fairly decent guess at,
Wasn't it 8 to 10?
it was 8.8 was the, what the study was based on, and we figured that there's some inflation and the land is kind of the question mark at, but I think Alan also mentioned that there might be other monies that would be,
But I think the 8.8 was based upon 2010 construction, and here you're looking 2016 construction.
Right.
So,
that's correct.
And I think just to mention,
Yeah.
It is.
we did have the 2 million for the land purchases in here, but it's not in the 13.
correct.
So-
And that's,
So that goes to
that,
15 million.
So it's really a 15 million when you add
Right.
it all together.
and that was done to reflect we had the discussion at the last council meeting about including that project, and the 2 million was included, but the 13 was put on hold. But I had in talking about it with Sean, we felt it was probably appropriate to show it both ways, because you're
Yep.
not gonna spend $2 million for land in 2015 and then, not look at anything else for a couple more years.
Well, it also included the police department, and the actual building may not include the police department. I mean, they may stay where they're at,
Right.
so.
That's right.
That would significantly reduce that amount.
that's
Yeah,
significant.
yeah, this could change dramatically, for
This
sure.
includes the police department moving into the public safety building along with the fire department.
Okay,
And this, after the discussion, and you can see the impacts we can certainly go back and run these at a different budget level to see what that would look like. Okay? Okay, now, with 3 or 4, if you flip over to page 5, and this was the point that Devin and Neil have alluded to in the questions that have already come up. When we're looking at that capital projects fund, and we're looking at where the balance is, you've got your draft audit, so we've got a good number for end of year 2012. And then we look at those list of projects that we are going to include in the 150 or less, so we're not going to borrow for those. What you see is that balance gets exhausted very quickly. And so once you get out into that 2015 and 16 range, which is in our 5-year window that we're really trying to focus on with this modeling, you're already getting into a negative balance. What does a negative balance mean? Well, a negative balance, if you're still doing the projects and you're saying we want to proceed with these, they would have to be borrowed for, find a way to make it work in the operating levy, or the third option, and actually this is a segue into page 6, the other option, and certainly not one that I would encourage, is your savings account, your fund balance. And I think I mentioned to the Finance Committee and the Council that one of the reasons that Hudson has a very, very strong bond rating right now, the AA2 rating, is that you do have a very healthy fund balance, and the liquidity of the city is a big factor in that analysis and determining what the bond rating is. But what would happen is that these dollars that you see on the green bars here then would be getting drawn down to pay for those projects that the capital projects fund would not have funding for.
And our bond rating could change.
And subsequently, if those dollars get drawn down, the bond rating could change, right?
And printing money, you don't think
We
is.
can't do that.
Unfortunately, no. So that's, on the positive side, on the fund balance, and I don't know if Neil has talked about it, it looked like your fund balance went up 500,000.
367,000.
Yeah, it was from end of 11 to end of 12.
Correct.
Yep. So that was a good thing to see. Okay. Moving forward then, on page 7.
Can we back up 2 seconds?
You bet.
On this fund balance, where do you figure our bond rating will start to suffer? At what amount? Is there established, or is it a percentage?
Well, yeah, let's talk about, we've got a informal policy right now of
25 to 27.5%
percent. I'd say that would be.
Of our, what?
of our annual expenditures.
Yep. So 25 to 27% of your annual expenditures, and I think you're at about 40 right now, isn't that, I think with this,
Closer to 46.
46, okay, thank you, Neil. So one part of that would be if you violate your own policy, certainly that would be an issue. The other part would be if you had a combination, I'm just speculating here, of a combination where the city was starting to do significant projects. And, because right now, I think, as I'd mentioned to you guys before, for a city the size of Hudson, the amount of debt you have is very, very low, very, very low. And you were able to pay it for a lot of projects that was through the growth that you had and pay that debt off. So that's left you in a very solid position that way. But as the mayor was alluding to, if you're adding debt and your fund balance is going down, and particularly if the rating agencies would look at it and say, we don't see how they're going to stop this. How can they stop this? Because these projects are built, these kind of ongoing projects are built into their budget, and they don't have levy limit capacity. How are they going to get this done? I think the combination of those factors would be really the driver. Certainly, if you start going below your stated policy with no plan to build it back up, that would be a big red flag. They won't give us an exact, if you guys get to this point, it's going to happen. But I think that those kind of elements together would be things that would drive to
So
that.
do they look at what our policy is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. On the one hand, they will say to Neil and Devin, good work having policies, and end of the council. On the other side, if you violate them,
Right.
then they hold you accountable for that.
It's also disclosed in our financial statements, what our policy is. So, it's right there, for, the public to see, and obviously they're going to look at it.
And they might look at it, what's, similar to what he said, what's going on, why all of a sudden were they at,
Right.
you know?
What's
More
the
questions,
change?
more questions coming than
Yeah.
beyond what you were talking
So
about.
you gotta be careful on the amount of projects you take on compared to everything else, right?
Yeah, and if you're ever, there's not, I wouldn't say that there aren't circumstances that when you look at a financing for a particular project, that you should never consider having any amount come from cash. There might be a reason to use some cash for a particular project. I think that, at least in my experience, is viewed most favorably by the rating agencies when it's for a big single project. So if you were to say, we've decided we're going to use X amount of cash for the public safety building as an example, because we feel like where our balance is relatively strong, we're not drawing it down in other factors, and we feel like if we draw it down a little bit, we're still at a safe position. Those are really well received. It's really those instances where you're kind of using it for ongoing things, and they see that there's no way you're going to get out of that ongoing approach.
So you draw your projects to 150 down, you keep drawing it down every year.
Because those projects won't go away.
Right.
Yep,
So they would look, I think, negatively on
Right.
that, wouldn't they?
yep.
So if you had an $8 million budget and you reduce that by 10%, you're talking 800,000, right? I mean,
Right.
that's how it would work.
Yep.
So that's
Not a
really
lot.
probably be the
Right.
it isn't like there's millions and millions there.
That's right, yeah.
When was the last time we had a rating review? Was that last year? Was it 2 years ago?
It was 2011
Okay.
with the debt issue. And actually, I'm a little surprised that they haven't called myself and Neil and Devin and said, we want to do a surveillance rating, because
Sure.
they've been, since the market crash and all the issues with AAA-rated credits all of a sudden going to junk bond levels overnight, they have ramped up what they call their surveillance ratings, where they'll just call and say, we'd like to do a review and update the city's rating. So I would expect, I'd be surprised if we do another debt issue, we'll do it then, but if we were not to, I would be surprised if we get through all of 2013 without getting that call.
Thank you.
All right, if we flip over to 7 then, this, I just wanted to include as a reference as we segue into the projections on the next couple of slides. But this was that issue that we talked about at the last meeting regarding the city's existing indebtedness. And as I had mentioned, the overall debt, about 9-10 million, I think, in general obligation debt, very low for a city the size of Hudson. And you also, and it's a credit strength, you have a rapid amortization of that debt. Everything as it's scheduled right now is paid off by 2020. So those are very good things. The only negative on it, though, is that if you have sizable new projects that you want to do, you really are left in a situation of laying that new debt on top of what you have. You don't have a lot of opportunities to so-called wrap it around existing indebtedness that you've got. So that's the one negative, is that if you have new debt, it's really going to have an upward impact. There's not a lot of capacity to wrap that debt around. Okay? All right, and with that in mind, we move forward to page 8. What I wanted to do here is put together a forecast going forward for the most recent list of capital improvement projects that the city is looking at. That, again, now these are projects greater than 150,000. And what we did previously when we got together is we did 10-year financings at 2.75% interest rate, which is high given the current market. But, since we're doing it over 5 years, we wanted to be somewhat conservative. We've changed that for today's discussion to a 20-year financing for these projects collectively at a 3.75 rate. Again, still a very conservative rate given current market conditions. The idea was that not all of the projects, but many of them were street and probably had a longer useful life. Mm-hmm. And it's not uncommon to do general obligation debt up to the maximum of 20 years, which you got to repay it all within that 20-year period. So with the 5-year CIP that we're looking at, this is what we would expect the debt to look like going forward. And so a couple things I'd point out. The blue is same as that previous chart. That's the existing debt that the city has and has to make payments on now. The red then is the proposed debt issues going forward for the new 5-year CIP, and this starts in 2013. And what you see happening is a gradual, I just call it a wave upward, that reaches a peak in 2017 and 18, and then falls down. You will notice, though, if you look at 2021 through 2028, that's very, very flat. And it's really at the same level that you're at right now. So what would this potentially mean if we move forward with this exact model? You would have this wave up, and it really does kind of encompass the 5-year CIP that we're talking about now. And you'd be at a point where there would be some capacity to add projects for the next 5 years. And that capacity, you would have some capacity at that point to wrap those projects around. Another way we could do.
You're assuming, though, we want to keep it up there.
Exactly,
It's
yes.
like, I don't want to get it up there and then just say, oh, now we've got the ability to borrow more.
I think one of the
To stay
difficulties
there.
here in looking at this is we are looking at a 5-year plan. And we did ask the department heads to go out longer, so we do have things like, fire trucks out there in a little bit longer range. But, if you look at the funds that were put in here, for example, for street maintenance and mill and overlay, that's probably going to be an annual thing, unless we're going to have a massive catch-up in these first 5 years. We're gonna have those and major pieces of equipment. So, what you have here with this leveling, that's debt based upon this 5 years projects. Well, after 5 years, you're gonna add another 5 years worth of projects on, and, another 5 years. So, at some point in time, and that's going to be part of the discussion as, to what's our tolerance?
Yeah, that's exact, it becomes that tension of the projects and what sort of a tax level is the council comfortable and the public comfortable with it, and how do you bring those two together? And that's exactly the point that comes up with this, is how do you find the sweet spot where you get done what you have to get done, but it's acceptable. Okay. Now,
Ouija board, right?
Ouija.
What's that?
Ouija board?
If we flip to 9, and remember this group, this page 8, no public safety building in it, except for the 2 million. The 2 million land purchase is in here, but the building itself is not. Flipping over to the next page on 9, again, here you can see, given the size of that project, particularly at the 13 million level, particularly in the context of everything that the city has. The green then is the financing and repayment for the public safety building, and you can see it's just added right on top. And that's a big number. That's a big number.
Back to the drawing board, you guys.
Yep. Gotta find it a little bit. Our chief told us he likes his spot where he's at right now. Anyway, okay, that's good.
Okay,
That's
all
what we
right.
wanted to see,
Yep.
right?
Now, the other way we wanted to reflect all of this, the last 2 slides have been just on principal and interest for debt. And I would think another number, which you can certainly see the increase here, another number that the council would be interested in is, all right, where would the overall mill rate with this added, and Neil's helped us with some assumptions on operating expenses for the city, where would that go in the context of these 2 scenarios that we laid out, with and without the public safety building? And that is on page 10. So on the top of the page on 10, this is the first option without the public safety building. What we did on this chart, and again, this is looking at the mill rate for the equalized mill rate. The blue is the operation, so that's mostly just salaries, wages, keeping the buildings open. those kind of things. Right now, for 2013, it's at $4.66 per $1,000 of valuation, of equalized value. That's where we're at right now. And with the financing that we've put together and in that chart, what it goes up to is about $5.34. Okay, and again, this is the option without the public safety building. And that's achieved in that 2017, 2018 range. That's where you're kind of peaking out at that $5.34. The lower chart is with the public safety building. And so there you'll see the number jumping up about another 50 cents, with it peaking out instead of at $5.34, it's at $5.88 at that time. And again, for a comparison basis, where is the city today? It's at $4.66. That was your equalized mill rate when you did your budget 2012 for 2013, the one we're in right now.
So we're either raising it by 17% or by 25%.
With these, yeah.
Yeah, in these two scenarios.
Right.
Yep,
Wow, those are not great options.
yep. And the other note I'd put on here, just for reference, is the public safety building at the level, that's about a half a buck, 50 cents in the mill rate right now at that size. So that's just looking at, if you wanted to highlight, because that project is by far the largest of everything, what impact does that have on that mill rate? You would be going again from that 533 to 588 with that included.
So if you cut the public safety building in half, for example, would it be about 550? Is that those numbers?
It's a fair number,
All right.
yep. Now, the one other thing, not to pile on bad news on this, but to be real realistic, include everything, remember that this also has that negative balance that we talked about a little while ago in the CIP. If we're not dealing with that negative cash balance in here, so we would either have to be using our fund balance, which I think everybody's saying that's not very attractive to do that, or we'd have to cut back some of those projects or push them out over a longer period of time. Or thirdly, it would really become part of the blue bars here, or the red bars in the debt, which again would even push that up, the overall impact a little bit more. Okay.
But the, part of the problem is our levy limits. Again, if we end up trying to fund those out of the operating,
May not even be able to do it on operating, right?
So, I mean, there's
That's the way it is.
there's always the option of a referendum.
yep,
That's right.
that's right.
What did you say, Laura?
There's always the option of a referendum. We always say there's levy limits. Well, there's levy limits, but if we think there's something important enough to go to voters with, we can ask to exceed our levy limits.
If we back up, yes, I agree with you. If we used partial of our fund balance to pay down our existing debt, does that hurt or help us at all, or is that just a kind of an asinine?
So it would be a concept of maybe,
800,000, because I think that would be 10%, right?
yeah, as we talked about, how much could you bring it down?
About $800,000, I think. Wasn't that, Neil?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not worth it.
It's probably not gonna have enough of an impact to get you to where you'd wanna be. Yep. Yeah, the only other, well, but you'd have no way to pay, I was just gonna say, if you had other funds that you could loan to the general fund temporarily, but it'd be so, there's no way within levy limits to pay that back to other
Right.
funds. That's really the problem there. That's another one with the levy limits, if you're a city that has strong cash in the non-general funds, used to be you could maybe do an internal loan to yourself and pay yourself interest. You can't do it because there's no way to be able to levy to pay that loan back to those other funds, because that gets caught in the levy limits as well. Right.
Here's a third or additional question. If we waited till 2019 or 2020 to do the public safety building after we've gone through quite a bit of debt service, would that be a better jumping off point, rather than trying to get within our 5-year plan and go out to like 8 years, or, I mean?
Something's gotta move.
Something's gotta give,
Yeah,
obviously.
you're right though, John, something
Yeah,
has
that's
to
kind of
move.
what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so maybe we just slow it down here and think about doing a better study on what we really need versus what we're kind of hoping for. I don't know, just a thought.
Well, slowing it down, but not, we need to focus on the infrastructure, the roads and stuff, just talking about specifically the building.
Public safety.
But if you turn to page 9 and answer your question, all you'd really be doing is taking these green bars and shifting them out a couple more years.
Because you're gonna have the same expenses, right?
Right, you're gonna have, you know,
So,
But
so
what he's
in,
thinking
so in
is not-
17 and 18, they wouldn't be as high, and where you see
Exactly right.
19, 20, and 21 where they start dropping,
Yeah.
but you're still gonna have those green bars.
What are the potential opportunities for an increase in revenue to the city during those years? Either by additional buildings, increased population, some of those things that would factor into this, which would,
When does U-line go on site? That's
which
gonna
would
be what,
minimize,
next year?
which would minimize this
For the
impact.
2015 budget will
Yeah.
be full.
And isn't being looked at here,
Yeah.
and there has to be, I mean, I guess in my.
Actually, we do have some assumptions for U-line coming on, where we would get the money, you know, that bump in 2015.
Yep.
We did put that in there, so when
Okay.
Sean has his projection in terms of what our levy would be.
Yep.
That, you know, kind of quote, I'll call it a one-time bump, is in there. Now, whether there's other development, I don't think, we have factors in for some growth, but not anything of that size in one particular year.
So we are projecting some residential growth or
Yes.
some.
Commercial, you know,
Commercial.
if you look at the
Yeah, you know,
tertiary
some change, in,
percent.
you know, some, you know, continual change, and it's a pretty conservative estimate, but there is a change in our equalized value, you know, built in virtually every year.
well, and, you know, cost of construction will go up too. So, I mean, we can't, if you wait, there's a, yeah, okay.
But I think one of the
RVs then.
difficulties is that, you know, when you look at our equalized values, you know, 1.4 billion, and, you know, even, you know, if you looked at a $20 million project, it's not moving the number that significantly. I mean, it's huge, but it really doesn't move the total number that significantly.
And that's when we were looking at infrastructure needs in the late 90s and the early 2000s in Hudson, your growth was at such a rapid pace then that you were constantly able to spread those new infrastructure needs over a larger and larger and larger base. This, as Neil pointed, we do have some growth in there. Other than the U-line, though, it's a very, very modest level of growth. And again, that, if you had the growth, like another spell of growth like you had before, that's gonna be an opportunity. But right now, I think we want to be more conservative in terms of projecting that, what's gonna be available.
So something's missing from this equation, and maybe I'm naive, but if we build a new fire station, is it only the city of Hudson who's gonna be paying for that? We have a joint fire,
Correct. They would pay.
I don't know on the state, I know on the fire truck, I mean, they've talked about that, you know, as far as.
Right, it's the
My view on
equipment.
that, and John's our representative, I believe, but one of the things we talked about is moving that out for, so it's more of a service for our town further out.
That's right.
So, you know, I would agree with you that we would have to talk to our partners on that and say, this is to your advantage also.
right? And if they're not on board, you know, we don't have to do it, but I don't see that as solely a city of Hudson.
And the fire
I
truck
tend
is-
to, yeah, the fire, go
Fire
ahead.
truck is in your full, and did we reflect that 50% of that to be coming back? No. So that's also a factor. in that.
Yeah, and I mean, you
So
know,
you'll have 900, let's say it's 1.8 million, you'll have 900, or 800,000 coming back from the other, coming in. on
And
the
we already
revenue.
have funds that, there are already funds set aside to work towards the larger engine. That I don't remember the exact rules on how it works, but it's like 350,000 or.
but I, you know, where we're reimbursed, if I'm wrong, Devin, is it's on more of a depreciation basis.
Yep,
So
it's
if
at
it
the
was
same-
one, you know, if you spent $1 million on a fire truck, and we're gonna get reimbursed half, we're gonna get reimbursed.
Over the length of the, whatever the length of the loan is.
So
So if
you
it's
may
a
be-
20-year bond, we're not gonna get.
You're gonna
it'll
get
be spread over 20
$25,000 a
years.
year.
And that truck would likely stay downtown anyway, I would
Right.
guess. For the satellite, it's more of residential action. And I don't know how small you can make a building like that to make it effective.
Well, there's two thoughts on that would make kind of the main one, and then maybe this one would be a satellite with EMS in there, and again, that we're just talking now, there's no plans.
Right.
Uh,
I think it's smart to have a 5-year plan, because then you start to spend money wisely every year, and that goes into the plan, rather than
Yep.
sorting, well, I don't know what we're gonna do this year, or,
Yep.
yeah, it's good, it's a good exercise.
That was the purpose.
But,
what we're
and,
doing.
and I think in here, we've had some discussions about, other potential revenue sources. I mean, for any of our road projects, we know we're gonna have special assessments for a portion of it. Is it that significant to factor in here? Is it really going to move things noticeably? Probably not. But I think, if you look at it, if you look at it in terms of what it would cost in terms of a mill rate, you're, maybe 1/10 of a mill, but I think, we're probably better off right now focusing on, the larger picture, where we may get, additional grants. I mean, we've had, and actually it's kind of unfortunate, but the state in the budget is cutting off some potential other ways of raising operating revenues.
Yep.
Where, we were lucky in that in 2000, this past year or last year when we created the stormwater utility, if we did that this year, our levy limit would go down by the amount, by that amount. If that goes through the budget, that's what's in there now.
It's in there now.
It's in there now.
Yeah,
So,
joint
we will.
Figuring out all the ways cities are getting around the.
Exactly. The state's figuring out ways to, make it more difficult to raise additional revenues. So we were fortunate in that regard, but I think that's one of the things we have to
It
continue.
isn't retro though, is it?
No, it's not.
If we were to raise our
If we
rate
did
there,
it
would
after December 1, or January 1,
This year.
2013,
Yeah.
it would be retro. But I think, we will look for other revenue sources, and I think, you have to for any kind of grants that might help offset the costs.
Well, the last part of the discussion for today is, in talking with Devin and Neil on Friday, we thought, well, maybe it would also be helpful for the council if we targeted mill rate levels, and said, well, what would you be able to afford out of that? To kind of work it backwards, rather than get the projects and work with those, say, okay, where is it gonna drive the rate to? What if we target a particular rate, and then what would be affordable under that? So on page 11, what we did is we said, okay, let's say in our discussion that the city felt, okay, we're at $4.66 now. We could live with either immediately or gradually going to $5. And this model is that you would immediately go to $5 from the $4.66. What would be supportable in that? If you go over and look at the right corner there where it says allows Hudson to issue 3 bonds in 5 years, this wouldn't have to necessarily be 3 bonds. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you could do it, but theoretically, with going to $5, you could be able to afford at $6 million in 13, $5 million in 17, and another 5 in 18. What would that mean? Well, that would be financing $16.5 million worth of projects over the next roughly 5-year period. But the other thing that it would mean is that you would now have the 5 mill rate, the $5 mill rate, $5 per thousand of value, all the way out to 2033. And that would have only financed your projects for that 5-year window. The CIP is that 17.7 for the 5 years. Again, this is without the public safety in there, is in this example. You finance 16.5, but when you get out to 2020 and 21, if you've got other projects, you're already at that $5 level. So you would have to add that on top of that at that point. And that's where, when I was talking about those slides previously, where the debt kind of waves up and the mill rate kind of waves up, but then it comes down, that is structurally, that gives you the opportunity to have it go up, but now it's up, and you got to deal with the reality of that. but it also gives you the ability to maybe do some things behind it and stay at that level going forward. This option of being at 5, you can finance 16.5 million in projects over the next 5 years, but you're at 5 all the way out much longer than that. So if you do 5 years from now, want to do more projects, it's going to have to be layered on top. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right, and if you go, I think if you look at the other two, which are on page 12 and 13, these are raising that level to 5.25, and again, that's from 4.66, where we're at now. And there you got an 11 million, followed by a 6, a 5, and a 2 million. So that's getting 24, either 24 million over that period of time. But again, it's the same reality. Then you're running out that 525 out for a much longer period of time. And lastly, and this is, the third option actually comes in really very similar to the option that we talked about with the public safety building being in there. You go up to about that 5.5, and you stay right at that level. It doesn't go all the way up to the 580, but it goes to 5.5, and you're locked in at that level with, again, really only financing. You can finance 30 million, but over a longer period of time, is that going to be enough to cover all the projects that the city's looking at going out over that longer window? So these were 3 options to kind of give the council a sense of, if you wanted to look at it more, try to find some solutions for us that will allow for some adjustment in the mill rate, but here's a target that we're comfortable with, and what would we be able to do within that restriction? It would be another way to kind of approach things, and depending on what you thought you were comfortable with and what you thought the public would be comfortable with for the projects that you're doing. And that's always part of it too, is what is everybody getting? What projects are we achieving by going to this level? It would be another way to approach it and kind of go back and forth to see what would make the most sense.
These paybacks over 20 years, these options?
These are, correct. Yep.
Have we ever issued a 20-year bond?
Not since I've been here.
Not, only for utilities.
Okay.
Mayor. We have done sewer and water bonds. General obligation, I don't think so.
10.
I think they've always been 10-year notes. Yep.
So on a $200,000 home, it would be about $230 a year if we went to the 5.5 increase in their taxes on the city portion of the taxes. I think I'm doing that right.
I think so.
So,
200 times the difference between
Yep.
times 83.
Yep.
You gave us the bad picture, if you will, but what's it include?
Yep. All our projects that we.
Exactly, right. This is a number at this point, and then what we'd have to talk about is, okay, what projects could we put within within these numbers?
Now I think we have to look at, did this include that the 5.5%? Did that include all the projects that everybody wanted? I mean, was it Santa Claus again? Everybody got almost everything they wanted?
Well, if you look at the 5.5.
Yep.
I think, Sean has it here.
Yep.
That would assume
22.
30.5 million of projects over a 10-year period. And our 5-year, plan here, including the, public safety, was 34 million.
34?
Right.
At what point would we have to be concerned with the capital fund deficit? Or are we just going to leave it? Is it an impact on any financing? Is it an impact on interest? Do we have to address that at some point, or can we just continue to have a deficit?
Yeah, I think it does have to be addressed. It could be that you do some of those projects within some of this, but then that would crowd out other projects if you choose to finance them. But right, because if you do the projects but don't deal with the deficit, you're really you're spending your cash. That would be the alternative that you're going forward.
So at some point in this plan, we'd have to factor in that $1.5 million deficit and take care of it somewhere. which means fewer projects get financed.
I think the other issue here that, we haven't had the conversation about this, but some of the equipment that we buy, particularly, let's say, public works trucks, you don't want to be paying for those for 20 years. They don't have a 20-year life.
No, right. We'd have to mix up the financing, some 10-year, 5-year, 10-year, with some 20. Yep, we'd have to do that. Right.
So would it make sense, our next step in this is to go back and take a look at our projects again? And
Well-
I think everybody needs to say, where do you feel comfortable? Lori's thought is, do we feel it's important enough to maybe go for a referendum on some of these issues that we have? What were you gonna say, Neil?
Well, what I was gonna say is, and that's where when Devin, Sean, and I talked about it, it's either do you work at the projects and try cutting those down, or do you set
Set the-
a tolerance level for debt and the mill rate, and then, have
Then do
that, start winnowing the projects down to meet that? And, you could probably work it either way.
I like the idea of saying, where's our tolerance? Because it's a lot easier to deal with the projects
At
than.
least an initial tolerance, and then we can come back and say, you're gonna lose all this, and you can say, oh, but we
Right.
need this.
One way to look at it would be that at 5, we get this, at 5.25, we additionally get this, and at 5.5, so that we know where well, that's a lot at 5, and these other projects would be nice to have, but not necessary. I mean, I think some prioritization is required to
Absolutely.
figure out if you could keep it closer to the 5 side, and then in 5 years have to go up another 0.25, well, then we get a long-term ability to match our taxes with our priorities, so that we're not trying to just jack it all up front. I guess that's kind of the way I see it.
There's some things that we've identified that our road improvements. That's something that I know in Public Works anyway, we've said, we'd like to be able to hit it hard for a certain defined period of time and really make a dent in what's needed there. I guess what I'd like to see us as a council do is say, you know what, that's our first priority. Our next priority is purchasing land for public safety building, I don't know. But further out is construction. We really have to sequence these things. We can't do them, I know I'm saying nothing that revelationary, but.
Well, we've talked about the roads for I don't know how long now, and this is kind of what we were trying to accomplish, I think, unless people's attitude has changed.
I haven't met a person in Hudson that doesn't like or likes our roads right now, frankly.
But if you drive around different
Falls.
if you drive even in Woodbury, our roads are very decent here. Yes, there's areas that need help.
Yeah.
By and large, our roads are very good. I sometimes think we get a little myopic and we go, wow, have you been on 6th Street or, drive around the metro and see, what it's like.
Well, the other thing too is with some of the smaller capital items, again, wants versus needs. And I know those are small, but they add up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that equipment and whatever, again, like you were saying, the Christmas list. Because if you've
that's
got
what we want.
10 things at $150,000, that's $1.5 million.
Right.
And we have the 2 big road projects,
Yep.
which are just kind of steering us.
And if you heard that, was it 2019 or was it 2017, the state is looking at Second Street? 17 or 19?
19.
It went on the agenda, which we weren't even on the agenda up until last week or?
Sure.
Yeah, 19.
Yep.
So we're at least 20% of it. if not
Yep.
more, depending on what they decide to.
Yep. So what's your pleasure? Do you want to, any questions?
I'd like
Randy?
to see the list from the department heads individually, and then we can all have another meeting or at our different committee meetings,
Sure.
go through and see what we prioritize. What
Do you
we
want,
come up
which approach do you want to do? Do you want to say, I can tolerate 5.5, or I can tolerate 5, or I can only go down to, we're at
Well,
466
what do we get at 5? I guess that's my point.
That's what I
So,
want to see before I would.
Okay.
yeah, I'm like, well, I don't know what that gets.
Yeah, I
That's
think one of the
Randy's point.
difficulties is, we went through to the committees once,
Yeah.
and what ended up coming back
Not
was
that different, probably.
a higher level of needs, instead of a winnowing down
So why
and
don't-
really
how about
prioritizing,
you guys
it went
do
the
that?
other way.
Can you do that?
I think we could.
You
And I
want-
think if we looked at it and had a couple sessions and tried to hit, a 5, a 5.25, and a 5.5 scenario, and where it would fall
Because
out.
in reality, I don't know that they may prioritize, but they're not gonna take it off.
No, I'm talking about that from you folks, from.
Correct. That's what I'm
financial
saying. If
side.
you go back to departments again.
Right.
I don't know that that's gonna solve a lot, for them to prioritize.
Everybody's gonna have to reduce it by a percentage, which is 17% or some
Yep.
percent. So if 5 is,
Right.
if 5 is 10% or whatever is off of what we are,
7.2,
What,
7.3.
what
Everybody has to
I wanna
reduce it
see
by
that
that
wish list.
Okay, you can see it.
Why don't we look at that and see?
Have they had that yet, seen that?
Yeah,
yet?
sure. Yeah,
We did that
yeah,
once.
we've had it here.
No, we didn't have it all
Oh, you're saying we just had Public Works at Public Works?
though. That,
Or public safety, I've only seen public safety, for example, so,
Well, we have that list.
Yeah, I can get it out to everybody.
that'd be great.
Because I'd be happy to cut the public safety budget down, and I'm sure you'd be happy.
Short
to
of
cut
the,
ours.
short of the building, everything else is quite, very, it's pennies compared to everything else. It's not, that's the only big ticket item we
The thing is,
have.
Those pennies can, I mean, there's a lot of smaller.
And the fire engine, but even that is that's
not in the
one
5
big ticket,
years.
yeah, it's in the 5, it's right at the
Right at 2018 or something.
18, it's the very last year in the 5-year. But everything else prior to that was very, I thought, quite small as public safety goes. But I want to know at 5, for example, do we only get one of the road projects and some of these other things? Or, we got to kind of have an idea of what we're looking at.
Well, so I think what we need to identify is what are the things that we are saying we absolutely are going to do? So
Right.
one is, we've said we're going to put X amount into road improvements. We know we're doing Wisconsin Street. That can't go away,
Right,
correct?
right. And
Pine
that's,
Street, we haven't, I mean, I know we're applying for a grant, but we haven't definitively said when that would be. So I guess what I'm saying is, can we plug in what we know we're for sure going to do, and then we may find out there's not much to play with outside of that.
right, and I think even in the scenario, what came up as being approved was Vine Street in 2015. And if you look, if we got a grant, it's probably 2017 or 18 in
Right.
reality.
Right.
And we may end up shifting, some of those numbers. But I think we could probably go through and look at the list. And, there are some things that have an obvious, certain piece of equipment that have an obvious life cycle that you're gonna have to replace. And, that you don't want to extend out any further, and we've all seen those before, once they become too expensive to operate. And I think some of those you keep in there, and then you can sit there and, say, if those are the number one, what's the gap, and what are the best
Yeah.
projects to fill that gap?
Because I don't think there's going to be a lot left.
Okay? Feel
Sounds great.
comfortable with that? I think we're making progress.
and I would like to see part of that plan be paying off the deficit on the capital budget.
Yeah,
So
factor
something-
that in.
so if we're gonna do this, we have to include something in there that says how we're gonna pay that.
Wait, I'm missing what you're saying.
The capital budget for the small
Fund deficit.
For the small ones?
Project fund deficit.
150,000 or less?
Right. Well, and the list I get you will have everything, including the small ones. So, I mean,
So we don't
we
do
can, we can work off that too, and say if we just have, if our debt tolerance is 5 mils, or our levy tolerance is 5 mils, we would include, because probably a number of those small pieces of equipment would fall within that.
Could you also go back and you had compared, what is the average mill rate around here? I know we're on the very low end, right?
Well, I mean, I haven't really looked at it. We're usually in the bottom 5 to 10% in the state.
So where does 5.25 or 5.5 come in? I would be interested to know that, I guess.
I still think it'll be in the bottom quarter for sure.
I think you'd still be very low. We could look at it statewide, and I think at our first meeting, we had a chart that had some of the surrounding communities that are, you guys are by far the largest in the immediate area, but we could pick out a few.
And I don't know if it's available for this year yet, but Cedar Corp always publishes.
Yes, they do.
And the
that-
league sometimes, the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance, all those groups sometimes do.
But I think if I can find what Cedar Corp publishes, because one of the things they look at is, the local levy, and then it's also local levy and utilities, and they also add in total levy, including all the other governmental entities. And that's usually a pretty good analysis, so it gives you a benchmark as to where you're at.
Expenditure per capita sometimes is
Yeah.
another.
Part of the issue, though, is that from the state funding perspective, ours is probably, 100,000?
75.
Yeah.
River Falls gets 1.9 million dollars.
Gotta build, we gotta build a university here, I think.
There's nothing to do with that. They get money for that too.
They get money.
Is that right?
On top of it.
Yep.
They
So,
get an expenditure for having a
but
government building in their community.
of our, what, $9 million, including debt service roughly is our budget, we get, what, about half for roads, 500,000, and 173
I think
for,
we're at like 550, so probably between the two, 750.
so we have a
750.
percentage of our budget is pretty small. Of everything comes from everything. Most of our funds to run the city come from local taxpayer dollars. And if you were to give us another 2 million, Chippewa gets 2.6 million. And that would sure help our budget. But we don't, and we can't complain about it, because it is the way it is.
And we could talk about our mill rate, and
Yep.
then there's potential increases in
Yep.
in the school district and
So,
wherever else.
County.
So when you talk about mill rate, we're even, shall I say more, would it be fair to say we're even more efficient? Because we don't get any of the state funds, correct?
Correct.
Or I shouldn't say we don't get any, we have a small percentage of
Less.
our budget. So it's even less, we do more with less.
We don't have 13.
Is there any such thing as a return on investment index for cities or for government?
Well, that's why
We're getting a
sometimes,
heck of a good one.
sometimes they do expenditure per capita and those type
Yep.
of things, and showing how much we spend per capita on police versus other places. And
There's 23 cities between 12,000 and 15,000 or whatever, and we are the lowest, second lowest,
We're the most efficient.
lowest in state aid from, in the state of Wisconsin.
I think the other one's a Milwaukee suburb that's quite,
I think
very wealthy in comparison to
Whitefish Bay gets more money than we do.
Not to belabor it, but how does that get calculated? Why?
Well, if you could figure that out. that'd be a good one.
Okay,
That's
good
a
enough.
project for the
I'm writing a letter, I think, or something.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with commercial development, I think.
But I think that was a formula that was set probably in the 90s.
And it's
And it's
At least 15
political
years ago.
football and
Nobody wants to-
when
That's not
anytime you
gonna
change
change.
it, somebody's gonna get gored and.
Right, okay,
When you're at the bottom, we'd like to change. If you're at the top, you don't want to change.
right, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, anything else? No. Thank you. Move for approval is, or for,
adjournment.
So moved, I'll move to adjourn.
is there a second? All in favor? One of our adjourned.